there's a saying that you leave the best for the last. In my case, I leave the worst. Well, maybe not. So the team that I'm going to, this is the last team on my list of analysis, is Kolkata Knight Riders, my home team. I wish it wasn't, but it is. What can I do? So this is, I trolled this team incessantly on social media, and for good reason. They had atrocious retentions. I mean, who retains Andre Russell in this day and age for the price that he was paid? I mean, he basically rivals the Bengali jute industry for health. And Sunil Narayan at that price. And the very injury-prone Varun, when you're already taking one injury-prone person, and then you're compounding it with taking another injury-prone person, which is Varun Chakravarti. And again, at the amount of money they pay to retain him, while letting Shubman Gill go. Now, this, I believe, was not a franchise decision. This was, I guess, a Shubman Gill decision, that he just wasn't happy with the amount that he was being paid. Again, it didn't make sense. These retentions, at least to me, didn't make sense. I think they could have bought Andre Russell at a much cheaper rate in the auction, because it's very well known. Even Andre Russell's form over the last year in the different franchises, and he plays incessantly throughout the year. There's no way a person can play cricket like somebody goes to office and still maintain a high standard of performance. So he's everywhere. Andre Russell is everywhere. You have a para cricket match, you will come and you play if you pay him. So he just basically dials in his performance. And I don't think he's there. I mean, if you look at his played for Bangla Premier League, he was a very middling performance. So again, I'm not saying he's not worth his place in the side, in an IPL's team, but definitely not the top bracket retention for you. That should have been, in my opinion, Shubman Gill. Because you've invested in Shubman Gill. That's really who that was your future. So with Shubman Gill and Venkatesh Iyer retained, and then I would have been okay, but not with the retentions. They screwed up with their retentions majorly. And then to make things worse, they bring back, by the way, if they wanted to retain, I think because they spent a lot of money on Rana, they could have just retained Rana, I believe. Still would have been cheaper. So Narayan and Russell were the worst retentions among all the teams. It just made no sense. Again, I think they could have, if they wanted to play Russell and Narayan, and I understand that Kolkata Knight Riders have this philosophy, it's almost like it's a philosophy taken to the extreme that they only want to work with people who they have worked with, unless they have a good reason for not wanting to work with them. They could have bought back both of them, and I think they could have done it much cheaper for the money they paid at the auction for, Rana. So again, it made no sense, but very little of what Kolkata Knight Riders does made sense. And especially their first day at the auction, when they essentially blew like 70% of whatever little purse they had left. And the fact that they even have a 11 that they can put on the field is a matter of great luck. I think they had a lot of lucky buys at the end, where the other franchises also made some mistakes and they also blew their purse. That's where I think they kind of redeemed themselves at the very end. But overall, again, absolutely no brain went into any of this. They like to claim that they have big brains on Venki Mysore and Abhishek Nair, but really there's nobody in their right mind retains Andre Russell given the form that he is in. Now, I'll be the happiest person if he goes and has a great season. But again, purely this whole analysis is based on what's on paper. It's not on what's going to happen on that day. On paper, I would again say there's no reason to retain Andre Russell. But coming to the last thing that they did was they bought back Rinku Singh. Now, one would say, at that price, who cares? But they do. It's kind of symptomatic of what this side is. So people asked, why did they buy Rinku Singh? And they asked this of Janvi Chawla, who's Juhi Chawla's daughter, and she was on the auction team. And when she was asked this question, she said, oh, he's a good batsman, blah, blah. But then he says, he's very funny and a team man. And this is the first time in my more than 40 years of following cricket that I've ever heard any player, just the selection or retention or buying of any player being justified as he's funny. I mean, is this some comic relief element like a 90s Hindi movie? I mean, why is Rinku Singh? And by the way, when I say this on social media, Rinku Singh has supporters. And here's the thing. Rinku Singh has played 10 games for KKR in the IPL. He's played for no other team. I think he's played, but KKR is the only team in which he's appeared in IPL games for. And he's played 10 games, which is not insignificant for an uncapped player. And in that, he has a strike rate a little bit above 100, 105, 110, and his average is 11. And I'm sorry, but most uncapped players would not have had a career after that. There are uncapped players in Kolkata Knight Riders who haven't been given such a long rope. And yet Rinku Singh was bought back. I just don't understand. So who did Kolkata retain? They retained Venki Mysore and Abhishek Nair. I know that's a joke, but that's really the problem, that they retained these people. And I, as a KKR fan, am absolutely pissed at what they put us through. That they chose to retain Andre Russell, they chose to retain Venki Iyer, okay, I get it. But they chose to retain Andre Russell, they chose to retain Varun Chakravarti at that salary bracket. I think they could have got Varun Chakravarti cheaper, but given Varun Chakravarti's dodgy knees and Andre Russell's form and his health, there's no way they should have retained two people who might not make it to the final 11. So coming back to their team as it stands now, I think their opening is going to be Ajinkya Rahane and Venki Iyer, which is, again, it does have that template of the steady guy with the attacking guy. Yeah, it's okay. Right-hander, left-hander. Again, could it have been better? Absolutely. If they had retained correctly, they would have had more money. They could have gone for a much, they could have gone for, let's say, a Deacock or an Evan Lewis, but they just didn't have the money to do it. Then you have Mr. Rana, the talented Mr. Rana. Again, he's a good player, but I don't think he was worth the amount of money that Kolkata Knight Riders paid for him. I don't think he's that good. And I don't think his performance has been with Kolkata Knight Riders has been that good. But he's obviously their one drop at this point of time. Then you have the Iyer that they went all out for. And it made sense because they had no captains. So they have the second Iyer comes in at 2 drop. Now, this is a fairly decent opening 1, 2, 3, 4, I would say. And then you have Sam Billings, the first overseas slot, coming in as the keeper. And then you have Russell, and his backup is Karunaratne. Then you have another overseas slot where it's either Sunil Narayan or Mohammad Nabi. Then you have the pace bowling slot, which is either Pat Cummins or Tim Southee. Then you have Shivam Mavi, Umesh Kulkarni, and you have Varun Chakravarti. So if I had to look at if you go through it, it doesn't look very bad, but man, we could have done so much better. So it has fairly good opener. I would say it's an okay opening. And again, if they find that Rahane is not performing well, they have the option of putting in Alex Hales. Now, the good thing about Alex Hales, even though he's English, is that Alex Hales is not a part of the England first 11 out there anymore. So he is pretty much available at all times. So that's a good thing about having Alex Hales. So I think they're going to go with Rahane and Venkatesh Iyer initially because it kind of gives their team the balance they want. Because if you put Hales in, one of the overseas players has to go out. And that's again going to be one of the challenges of the Kolkata team. So I'm going to come to it. So it has a fairly solid middle order, I would say, with Rana, Iyer, and Billings. It's fairly solid middle order. It has on paper a good finishing with, let's say, Russell and Narayan and even Cummins. So fairly good, decent finishing, I would say. And they have a back, not a great alternative, but they have Sheldon Jackson. So they could potentially drop Rahane, bring in Sheldon Jackson. I mean, they have certain other things that they could play with. And again, if Rahane doesn't work at the top, they have Alex Hales to bring the power at the top. They could, even if they want, put Billings at the top because Billings has opened. So they have a few options there. Again, this whatever side they have, it's because of the end they could snap up Billings and Hales. Without Billings and Hales, and to an extent Nabi, this would have been terrible. So now it looks kind of okay. So what's the weakness? This is one besides, of course, the fact that their team essentially, there are a lot of people with injuries. I think the biggest weakness is it's a very weak Indian pace attack. Shivam Mavi, Umesh Yadav now. So this is the Indian pace battery. So when you have this kind of pace battery, what's going to happen is that they might have to play 2 overseas bowlers, which isn't optimal. Given the side, they can't really afford that. But again, this bowling attack, what I see, it can't defend any score. That even they're fairly decent batting, even what they make, I can't see them defending. There's no death bowling here. Absolutely no death bowlers. So I think what's going to happen is that Saudi and Cummins both will have to play. Then the attack looks kind of okay. Bowling wise, it's more or less okay. I wouldn't say great, but it's okay. But once that happens, that means Narayan can't play anymore, which means you open a problem spot there. So they will have these issues because they're not a balanced 11. I mean, they're not a balanced squad. But again, I would say they did well in the second half of the second day. Otherwise, they would have definitely been the worst team. I think they kind of redeemed themselves at the very end. So points, I would give them 6 out of 10 for their performance, for their team. I would give them 1 point extra for the cohesion that they have. I mean, they have retained essentially their team from last time, pretty much. I mean, Pat Cummins, Tim Southee, Mavi, Varun, Rana, Venki Iyer. So it's a it's like almost the KKR from last season. So there has to be something which is given, has to be points for cohesion. We've seen that teams that have played together usually do well. And for even a great 11, which is just assembled, it takes a season for them to kind of gel together. So I think that is going to work for KKR. But in terms of their selection strategy, retention, it's been a dumpster fire. Like every time, there's zero thought into this. It's just like, we want to work with these people, we will pay them whatever we need to kind of philosophy. And I don't understand this. As a fan, I'm disappointed. I always have been, but sometimes they've won it twice. So again, they were the finalists, but I'm not seeing it this time with this team. I mean, it's again, it was terrible. 1.5 days into the auction, like terrible. I thought that they would have to, like, I don't know who they were going to get to, get sort of Ganguly back again. I mean, who's going to bat in this? But now at least the batting looks decent, with Suresh Iyer, and, it has a linchpin. It is a decent captain. Suresh Iyer is a good captain. Venki Iyer is in good form. So they have some players, but I think that, their foreign, the people who they really splurged, I mean, they splurged on foreign players. And Andre Russell, I mean, he's not going to play all the games. He's going to be injured. And even in the games he plays, he's essentially moving towards that Yusuf Pathan mode, where he'll possibly play one good innings and win one game in, like, out of 16. I don't know how many games they're going to be with the new franchises, but are you going to be, is that the guy you pay your top dollar and give the top slot in your retentions for? I don't think so. So again, overall disappointing team for Kolkata Knight Riders as a fan. Could have been worse, could have been much worse. So maybe I should be thankful that we escaped not being the worst team on paper. We definitely aren't. We're definitely not close to the best either. But again, the frustration at such obviously bad retentions I have, and I think it shows on my face in the way I'm talking. So again, that concludes my set of analysis for the different IPL teams. Again, caveat emptor, this is all based on paper. So on the day, who shows up, who's available. Again, performance is purely a function of that. It's making plans and executing on them. And sometimes the 11 might not have much to do with it. It does, obviously, to an extent. I mean, that's why people spend so much money on it. But just because you have a great side doesn't necessarily mean that you'll win. And just because you have I think if you have a terrible side, you will lose. I think you can't consistently win. But even sides like Kolkata Knight Riders, for instance, which fairly decent 11 if everybody plays to their potential. I mean, those sides can punch above their weight. That I will give Kolkata Knight Riders. But again, looking at what I see in front of me, I'm not getting a good feeling. I'm as a Kolkata fan, I'm not happy with the way they did their retentions and also their selections. Except again, they were saved at the very end. So that's all. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.